join me as I've just won my first ever culture victory on Deity. When I first started playing this game, I went from settler difficulty all the way up after winning one game, and I tried winning all the various win cons because I was really interested in how variant and versatile the game can be. Domination, religion, culture, science, and so on. In fact, the first game I won with settler was, I believe, with Cleopatra with culture. But anyway, the point I want to talk about is all my videos so far, as you may have noticed, have been centered somewhat around diplomacy. Some of them a direct example of how to win a game of diplomacy, other maybe just clues and hints that revolve around diplomacy or factors in the light and look and the vision perspective of a diplomacy player, because that's what I've been this whole time. And it's been tough, I'm not gonna lie, trying to adjust my game style and the things that I usually love doing to make it viable for other win cons. Honestly, it's brought into perspective how, in a way, diplomacy kind of renders other game modes somewhat obsolete, because it is much easier to attain, in my opinion, at least so far, but maybe this is because of my experience with it, a diplomacy game earlier and more consistently than it is to win other win cons. But I was so happy that I was able to finally win a culture game on Deity that I wanted to share this with you. And the purpose of this video is going to be about what I learned. As you can see, we have achieved 360 of required 357 visiting tourist value, which will allow us to win the game. We also can see where those tourists are heading, and we can make some note that actually some of these locations are far more valuable than others. In particular, the national parks and the districts like the theatre squares holding art pieces, and the holy sites as well, even though they may not actually hold as much important, though to be fair, relics are pretty powerful, and I believe we do have ways to boost that. We'll talk about and touch those more specifically as we go through these points in the video, but hopefully you can see a perspective that is both fresh and enough to allow you guys to help win your Deity games as well. Welcome back. So here is the first thing that I kind of learned, I believe, by playing these culture games. And it's more to do with something that I've just come used to doing in all my other games and not realizing the impact that it had on my ability to play the culture. It's funny because we're right at the start, right? Before we even begin the game, and we already have things to talk about. What I want to talk about is just how much I chose game modes and game options that suited a diplomacy victory, but how it did not suit trying to go for culture, and it made things arguably more difficult than they could have been, for better or worse. So for starters, we talk about randomness. Random leader, random map, all that sort of stuff. I love using random. You know, it allows, as I've said before, a great way to provide fresh replayability that I can enjoy game after game after game without feeling bored, without feeling tired, without feeling jaded that I've done this 100 times before. So I really value it. But honestly, I'll tell you, I tried playing culture games with Gran Colombia, and they were pretty good, and I had a lot of cities, and I was Suzerain of like Nan Madol, but it wasn't really going anywhere. It wasn't until I was given a dedicated culture civ like Mali's Sundiata Keita and was able to exploit that synergy beautifully with holy sites and sugabas, commercial hubs, that really gave me that additional edge to get over the line. Because the way culture works, unlike diplomacy, is that the goalposts keep changing. It's very frustrating because you know where you are in the diplomacy game. It's very clear cut. You know, you have very set goals. 20 Diplo points, Mahabodhi gives you 2. Statue of Liberty gives you 4. Aid requests give you another 2. You know, other scored competitions give you a wide variety, but they're all very clear. You know, with culture, things are very different, very variant. Every single win has its own goal mark. And honestly, I feel like the quicker you can get into moving into the tourist and end game, the better, because the lower your goal mark will be. If you noticed in the first part, I had to get 360, which honestly required like over 2,000 culture and some crazy amount of tourism. And I just feel like a huge part of the culture game is in negotiating those parameters so that you don't have to work tirelessly to get over the line. I was only by a few turns able to win that game. The other civs had already got to the last stage of science. If I wasn't going to close it out then, it would have fallen through. And it was incredible how these game modes made things more difficult for that. Of course, online speed, perfectly obvious one. The faster you make your AI opponents, the faster they'll win the game. Now, in diplomacy, it's great. The faster the game goes, the shorter you have to wait for congresses. Every 20 turns. I'm sure on a standard difficulty, that might spread out a bit. You don't want that. So in a diplomacy game, it makes things perhaps easier in some respects. It also means that combined with disaster intensity level 4, you get more aid requests more quickly, more early, especially when people are going to advanced sciences and destroying the world, as we know, more quickly. More natural hazards are going to happen, more aid requests are going to be sought after, and you have more opportunities to win a game of diplomacy under these conditions. But with culture, you don't want any of that. With culture, you don't care for getting aid requests. And you certainly don't want to be impeded by natural disasters. So, the first point I want to make is maybe an obvious one, but it can also be easily overlooked, as I was doing. And honestly, it's kind of difficult not to want to continue bashing my head against that brick wall, which is these settings. Because I'm so familiar with these settings. I've played so many games with these settings. I don't really like to go back to standard speeds or basic maps or anything like that. Even the leaders, which I definitely would like to have more games and opportunities with culture-based civs. I'm interested in playing the Congo, the new Congo, and things like that. But I don't want to force it. I like the random nature of it. So that's definitely the first part, is be wary of your game modes. Be wary of all of them. Because I'd say other than mercenaries and corporations eventually allowing me to have a way to make my own product, which by the way is set for that city and that city alone, none of these game modes are beneficial for me when it comes to culture. And I imagine it'll be the same for you. Whereby I learned to love them so much more with diplomacy. I am kind of torn now, whether I want to continue or whether I want to change it up. So, to further elaborate just how much of a difference it makes in a culture game, I believe, from what I've experienced, we're going to discuss what exact benefits we got from having Sundiata Keita specifically chosen for us. Like I say, I think you can really kind of win a diplomacy game basically with anybody. And a lot of the time, the way I look at a diplomacy game is it's not about whoever you pick or whoever you choose, really. And the diplomacy specialists, like the United States, aren't even who I think are the best for a diplomacy game compared to, say, Pachacudi, as I was talking about, because I really want to just be able to build a big empire, have strong districts that can have high production, and move from there. I don't really care about the value of extra diplo favor. I can generate that myself if I have a good empire. But in culture, Sundiata Keita, and presumably others as well, that are highly specialized to benefit for culture, has been vastly more significant than anything I could imagine specifying for a Diplo game. So, what do we have here? Well, I want to preface this by saying that in a Diplo game, you don't really care about culture too much. You don't really care about science too much. And therefore, you don't really worry about building those districts. You build the production and food-based districts that allow you to grow your city as quickly as possible. What are they? Well, usually there are harbors for the food and housing, and industrial zones for the production. But you don't have really that much time, especially in online speed, to do that with a culture game. You have other priorities at stake. And when you have those priorities, it's absolutely vital that you can still account for the things and benefits of building your city that you have now lost for not building those harbors and industrial zones. How do we do this? Well, Sundiata Keita in particular has incredible synergy between his Sugiba and holy sites. And it was a combination of those two and building those two first, with the holy sites as my first district in most cities and my Sugiba the second, that allowed me to attain this victory. If we look at a Sugiba, it says a district unique to Mali, specializing in finance and trade that replaces a commercial hub. Units, buildings, and districts are 20% cheaper to purchase with gold and faith in this city. Plus 2 gold bonus for each adjacent holy site, not harbor. So fortunately, we don't need to worry about building those harbors because they don't even care about it. Plus 2 gold bonus from a tile containing a river. Plus 1 gold bonus for every 2 adjacent district tiles. So we're talking about holy sites and rivers. Well, from not having much vision compared to now, I had, say, about this much vision, I could see there was quite a nice river traveling along the land that I was currently occupying. And I just kind of hedged a bet that I was going to see more rivers. So when I picked my religion, and I picked for the Pantheon, River Goddess. Now usually I like to go for God of the Sea when I'm playing a Diplo game, but given our particular circumstance, I felt River Goddess would be better off. After all, it gives you plus 2 amenities, plus 2 housing to cities if they have a holy site district adjacent to a river. So now we have a reason for the Sugiba to be adjacent to a river and a holy site. And if we were to look at our holy sites, we will see that we have placed each of them on a river tile. We also have rivers going along this way. We have this river. It turned out that I was able to build every single city with a holy site and a commercial hub adjacent to a river, because we have indeed enough tiles with rivers on them to account for that. That meant that we had the amenities and housing that the harbor would normally give us, and therefore we didn't need to have harbors providing that for us, because we could just go straight into holy sites, get ourselves a faith economy. With the faith, we could buy Sugiba buildings, and with those Sugiba buildings, we were getting more money to then purchase faith buildings. And the synergy between those two districts that specialize with Mali meant that I could grow all my cities very quickly, have a nice economy in both those aspects, be able to buy the great people I wanted, and be able to get enough culture to win the game. So the next point I want to make when going for a culture game is just how difficult it seems to get Ancient Wonders. Now, of course, Ancient Wonders are a challenge no matter what you play, but when I'm playing with online speed and, of course, deity difficulty, I have a variety of different objectives to hit. You know, if you want to go for religion, you have to go, whether you're using tech shuffle or not, to astrology. And of course, you want it boosted, preferably. And that takes several turns. Now, these Ancient Wonders can go as early as turn 10.
And that takes you down a direction in the tech tree that doesn't necessarily go to the other wonders that you actually would want to build. It may give you Stonehenge, but you don't really want Stonehenge if you're trying to build a religion anyway. And the amount of dedication it takes to build a religion is more than enough to kind of eclipse any idea of an ancient wonder. In addition, if you want to build ancient wonders, you want to get Magnus early. Magnus actually has gone up in my valuation quite a bit. But still, getting Magnus isn't just, oh, okay, I just get Magnus turn 1. You can't do that. You need to study, of course, Code of Laws, then proceed to potentially something with a governor slot for it. This is probably the earliest you can get something like a Magnus. But by then, that's already like 10, 15 turns, so half the ancient wonders you want are gone anyway. I've gone through several games now where simply the idea of trying to get ancient wonders is a myth. Is maybe occasionally you get the rare opportunity, but beyond that is just, it's not something to really work towards. Now, if we have a look at my wonders that I have currently, you'll see that I've built a few. I actually have the Great Lighthouse in process, and at this point in the game we haven't finished it, but we do manage to finish it by the end. But I have Petra for this nice amount of desert over here. And I am actually working towards getting the Colosseum in this city, which we do manage to get ourselves. But yeah, classical wonders seem to be the first viable opportunity to be benefiting off the culture of building wonders. And I would say, combined with how long it takes to get Magnus, because you have to first get the governor title, and then you have to wait 5 additional turns, and you have to have builders ready. Or the religion, which itself is very powerful, as we already talked about with River Goddess. It's just nigh inconceivable, at least on online speed. Again, I have to stress that. Online speed is very different to standard speed. On online speed, when they're going as early as turn 10, within the first 20 turns, most of them are gone. You can see that I even tried going for a Temenunki here. Not quick enough. If you want to play with these settings, I would vastly recommend to avoid trying to build ancient wonders, which is sad because, from my understanding, the older the wonder is, the more points it gives you for tourism. However, I do wonder, because I'm not quite clear on this, is this specifically the era of the wonder itself, or the era in the game that you built it? Like, if you're, say, Babylon, and you build a Renaissance wonder or something, maybe a couple of eras earlier, does it increase the value of that wonder's tourism gain or not? I don't know on that. But anyway, the point is, stick to things that are realistic. Building your cities, building your empire, maybe getting a religion because it can help a lot. That makes sense. Hoping on these ancient wonders only to be disappointed time and again, just stay clear of them, at least on online speed.
We have just discussed governors and the importance to reevaluate them when going for different win conditions. Magnus being far more valuable in a culture game than I've ever had him be in a diplomacy, for instance. But that doesn't mean to say that we should neglect the governors that we already come to love. In my opinion, Liang is the strongest governor. That is the case with diplomacy, and I think that is also the case here for culture too. And the reason for it is once again city parks. Here we have a location to make a national park. But if we look at our appeal, we can see that while we have the land, we do not have the appeal. Fortunately, we have a couple of builders here that can give us that much needed appeal with a couple of city parks. So if we place them down, remember, city parks give +2 appeal each. This is incredibly powerful because it means that we're adjacent to these 2 tiles with this city park, these 2 tiles with this city park. And decorating them in a nice way that they can power up the national parks means that the national parks are giving us that much more tourism. Because remember, national parks give us tourism based on their total appeal value. So it makes them a lot more powerful if you can decorate around with careful planning. So now every single one of these 4 tiles is absolutely good to go to make yet another national park. We can move our nationalist in. We can choose to designate. We can get our amazing amount of Era score. And we now have yet another national park to add to our arsenal to increase our tourism and so on. Now here's an interesting one. I really like using the Civilopedia, and it's really helpful for a lot of things. It really helps provide some of that additional knowledge that one might not remember themselves. But it's not always entirely accurate. It leads on to my next point. So here it talks about neighborhoods and how they require appeal to be better, but it also talks about what generates and what takes away from a tile's appeal. And the particular part that we want to focus ourselves upon is the appeal themselves, because we have these nature parks that I'm really keen to make work, because we have these national parks, and I'm really keen to get as many national parks as possible because they are a key part to generating a high amount of tourism. They're one of the biggest sources of tourism that is good to get online as quickly as possible. So if you look back at this appeal, we can see that there are various things that increase it and certain things that reduce it. It talks about natural wonders and city parks, as we've talked about. It talks about holy sites, theater squares, entertainment complexes, all sorts of different districts, all sorts of different features that can add or remove. But what it doesn't talk about, if you notice, is city centers. So if it doesn't talk about it, surely the natural conclusion to make is that it doesn't affect appeal, that it has a 0 weighting to your total value of adjacent tiles to appeal. Remember, appeal is about what a certain feature or district or whatever does to the 6 tiles that are adjacent to it. So we have a city to build that I would love to be able to be within distance, because of course we need all these tiles to be owned by the same city. So this nature park could be owned by this city, and these two could be owned by this, right? Well, let's have a look at our appeal values at the moment. At the moment, everything apart from these two is fine. But if we build a theater square, if you looked at the list, it gives you +1. City park +2. We can change this appeal from 0 to 2. That will be charming, and that will be suffice. And we can change this appeal to 2. That will be charming. So that will become valid as well once these are in place. So no problem, right? Our current values are around the city center, breathtaking of 4, charming of 2, charming of 2, and charming of 3. So let's see if anything changes when we build the city center. As we noted from the Civilopedia, it didn't talk about city centers, so we can only presume that nothing would change. So if we go back to our appeal tab, we can see that all of a sudden these 2 tiles are no longer viable. Well, why is that? Well, if we look at the values, we now see this is no longer 4, but rather 3. This is a 1, another 1, and a 2. And the only conclusion to make from this is that while it may not have been listed in the Civilopedia, if we go back to that, city centers actively reduce the appeal of surrounding tiles by 1. Something to bear in mind when trying to build cities. It's very important, of course, to want to build them relatively adjacent to your national parks so that you can suffice the 4 important factors of a national park. But also bear in mind that you will have to fix some of that appeal if you build it too closely. So, something that might seem obvious to a culture vet, but for someone like me makes absolutely no sense at all, that I'd just like to touch up on as my next point, is the positioning of these national parks. Now, of course, there is more to a culture game than national parks, but national parks are an absolutely vital part of generating that much needed tourism. Here we have 2 examples of what I would consider to be valid possibilities for national parks. We have 4 congruent tiles together in a diamond shape. None of these tiles are being worked on in any way. If we look at this, you can see there is no plantation on this coffee. There is no sawmill, lumber mill on this woods, and so on. It's also, if we look at the appeal, perfectly valid. They're all green. Everything is green. And all the conditions that I would naturally consider to be logical are met. But there's one key difference, and you might know what that is, but we're going to discuss it because personally I find it very strange. So if you go back to national parks, you can see that there are quite a few criteria required to achieve this unique feature. The tiles must be natural wonders, mountains, or appeal of charming or better. They're not mountains or natural wonders, but they are appeal of charming or better. It makes you wonder, do you ever get natural wonders or mountains that are less appeal than that? Maybe, if in the worst spot. All 4 of the tiles must be owned by the same city. That is another one I want to talk about. If we go here, it does show these 4 are together in the city. This is a little more awkward. Let's just highlight over them. As you can see from this is not occupying these 2 because otherwise you'd be able to swap them over. This is not occupying either of these 2, so you could swap. Otherwise you couldn't swap them over. The swap icon here denotes that neither of these 2 cities are owning any of these 3 tiles, so they must belong to this. A little roundabout, but it does show you that both this 4 and this 4 are occupied and owned by Kumana. So, why is it that when I click on the naturalist, this one is saying it's perfectly good to go, and yet this one isn't? Well, it's the fact that even though they are the same shape, this one is rotated on one side, and this is a nice top-down diamond shape. To me, I think that's ridiculous. It makes sense for national parks to be of high-valued land. Usually these areas in real life, if you compare it to real life, are areas that are protected by certain governing bodies from any sort of tampering. So it makes sense that there is no plantations or other man-made constructions sitting on them, because in real life they would be preserved. It makes sense that they are of high appeal because usually these areas are great homes for all sorts of wildlife, as well as the natural foliage and plantations that grow there. So it makes sense that they have to be a high appeal. It makes sense that they are together because parks are usually together. So the fact that they should be the same city and that they should be all contiguous and form a diamond shape, that does make a lot of sense. But what is the value in it being vertical? If you look at maps and you look at all the parks, the most important part that the park is that it's separate from the industrial areas of the city, so that it doesn't get contaminated by all the pollution and all the other noise and cacophony that the industrial areas of a city would produce. But they're of all sorts of different shapes. I understand, okay, they need to be together and a diamond shape makes sense, but what is the value in it being vertical? I just find that incredibly strange. All the other aspects to making this work make sense to me, have some connotations to real life. You can understand why it has high appeal and it's not being worked on, and there's not sort of like, hustle and bustle going on in these tiles. They're left to be national parks, because that's how they normally are. But there's no need for this to be particularly vertical, is there? Anyway, something that irked me a little bit when I was still trying to learn how to do this. So we have a culture empire growing by the minute, getting more and more wonders, national parks, broadcast centers, and the like every single turn. But you know something? With all that wonder and splendor, holy moly, does it completely annihilate and destroy the age barriers for era score. Like, I am literally, I don't know if this is just a mark of achievement or what, 55, no less than 55 score above the golden age requirement. And that's great until you can no longer do it. Because, you know, this has been generated by what? A whole bunch of different things. Seaside resorts, but that happens once. New technology, a whole bunch of national parks. Corporation, again, the first one, but that's, again, unique and won't happen again. How many of these are likely to be repeated? Once I finish building my nature parks, you can see I have basically done that now. If we have a look at how many national parks I have, it's no surprise just how that 55 bonus era score was achieved. We have, I believe, 14 national parks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 national parks. Which is fantastic and great, but like, the caveat of that, of course, as I was talking about with the era score during that video earlier, is that there will come a time where I am not able to produce this era score again. Each time you go and achieve a high era score, the higher era score that you achieve, especially past the golden age, the higher the next bracket will be to even attain a normal age. It's very likely that we'll fall into a dark age sooner than later. And we need to make sure that we're ready for that. Right now, we're living the good life. We're getting an amazing benefit with cities with governors receive plus 50% tourism from world wonders and plus 100% tourism of all national parks. And of course, that synergizes with the fact that we've built so many, which you are here golden age. So that's a really good thing to try and go for. But just be mindful that when you play a culture game, unlike any other WinCon, it's going to completely obliterate the targets. And you'll be miles ahead, ready to crash at some point, but hopefully not too much damage when the inevitable Dark Age looms. Okay, so we've built our holy sites, we've built our succubas, we've built our national parks, we've built most of the wonders that we're going to do in this game. How do we push all of this to the next level? Well, the answer to that, and you may have heard it from plenty of other experts, is modifiers. Because holy, are there a lot of them in various different ways and are all incredibly powerful. If you have a good base of culture, you can really push it on. Well, let's talk about some of those modifiers. For one, to be able to choose Antananarivo. And what does Antananarivo give us? Plus 2% culture for each great person you have earned, up to a total of 30%. Now, of course, we've already built quite a strong gold and faith economy. So naturally, we've been acquiring quite a few great people. So let's see what this has been doing for us. We have acquired 13, no less than 13 great people. A lot of those being merchants, and we'll come to that in a sec. That is giving us a 26% increase modifier to our overall culture. And that is 118 culture right now. Over 100, 3 digits. In addition to that, there are great people, especially merchants. It's really nice that I was able to win with Sundiata Keita because it's particularly a culture-based civ with a heavy influence in and strength in commerce, because the amount of great people which can be bought with gold, especially merchants, that can give various districts and various parts of your empire big boosts to tourism. Grants tourism in each of the city's districts equal to adjacency bonus half of gold. Campus districts provide plus 10 tourism. If you notice, I managed to buy the industrial one because I haven't really been building many campuses, but I've certainly been building industrial zones as my tertiary 4th district. Provide plus 10 tourism. All of these great people are providing huge amounts of tourism to the culture that you've built. Also, I want to just mention, this is somebody, Mary Leakey, I want to be going for in future culture games, because holy moly, 300% of their normal tourism from artifacts. And you can make a whole bunch of archaeological museums and use this incredibly well. That's a huge modifier buff. We also have environmentalism as well as computers. And if you have a see here, both of these provide an additional plus 25% tourism across your empire. Absolutely massive. All these modifiers just provide a huge amount. And lastly, the last modifier I want to show is policy cards. I love policy cards. I already have some of the best policy cards we could have, plus 200% tourism from great works of music. So things like Bolshoi Theatre and Sydney Opera House and broadcast centres can help with that. It's a shame they don't really offer you as much a detailed look into what is providing that tourism as much as say this. So, we're coming towards the end of the game now. We have a target of still 262. That's like over 300% of what we currently have. 3 times the amount and more than the 79. And it just feels so like out of place when you look at the 800 plus tourism we're getting. And yet how it translates. And that is a very strange thing I don't really like about culture victories, which I was alluding to earlier, about how clear-cut diplomacy victories are, and yet how these two numbers don't seem remotely connected to one another. But it is what it is. What do I feel about it? Well, the best way to go about this situation, I believe, since it's constantly going to ramp up a little bit by little bit by little bit from turn to turn, is to make sure that you buy out all of these great works that the other civs that are pushing the bar up. Like Trajan's currently the highest, right? So he's the one I want to be purchasing all that culture from to stop that from happening. Of course, I need to make sure that I have enough space. I do have some broadcasts and theatres, slots for music. Also, I have archaeological museums for that sort of stuff. I have writing slots. So I have certain slots of certain things, but I definitely want to be building more. There is a government building that I want to be making as well, the National History Museum, that provides 4 great works of any type slots, which is really useful. So that's something to bear in mind. And basically the end game, I think, is all about trying to buy out as much of this, fill this up as much as possible, aside from the fact that you want great works of writing for the production bonus earlier in the game. And that you see here and try to buy out what this guy has. So what does he want for this? 600, sure. And then we can look into trying to get more stuff. And just using all that money that you've accrued from like so. And then towards the end, when you want to close out the game, you want to make sure that this number doesn't grow any more than it can by buying the other civs' culture works. We saw that last turn it was 262. Let's have a look at what it is going to be next turn. Because you can see it's gone up by 7. And this sort of increment around about 5 to 10 is going to happen every single turn for a good while. It's why, when you saw at the beginning, my final score was getting 360. It was increased by all of this. And once I was able to stop the bleeding and buy out the other civ's great works, it made a huge difference to how little more increment there was to each turn I was getting closer to the final goal.